I want the corpses of his men to serve as a deterrent to others. In addition, you are to assassinate Gato at the earliest possible opportunity, along with as many of his high-ranking men as possible. I want no one to be able to inherit control of an operational Gato corporation. Finally, Gato had been selling slaves both sex and otherwise put a stop to it permanently. You will be paid the equivalent of an S-ranked mission should you complete all of the secondary objectives, however it will only be recorded as an A rank and your secondary objectives will never be recorded. The old Hokage felt dirty asking this of the child he saw as his grandson at only 12, but it needed to be done. Yugao looked at Naruto and saw determined eyes looking back at her. Good boy. She thought viciously she wasn't happy about taking Naruto into what was about to become a war zone, but it needed to be done. Hokage-sama, Ayazuki Yugao temporary sensei to Uzumaki Naruto, accept this A-rank mission. The old Hokage nodded looking sad. Yugao looked to Naruto, determination shined in his eyes. Meet me in front of the gates in 1 hour, Pack lied. I would recommend sealing scrolls for most of your things. Naruto nodded and dashed out of the room as Yugao made the hand sign for the shunshin. Yugao may have looked confident on the outside, but on the inside she was more than a little worried how would Naruto react to what was effectively his first taste of black operations. She tried to console herself, this is what he had been trained for, but Anbu worked black ops and it broke them. How would the energetic little ball of sunshine handle them? Naruto turned up at the gate 45 minutes after leaving the Hokage's office. He had packed light only a few dozen kunai and around 100 shuriken, not counting the backups in his sealing scrolls. A small field medic kit and his guitar were sealed into various scrolls on his person, along with an Anbu issue mask. He wasn't a member of Anbu, not by a long shot. But with the Hokage telling them that all of their secondary objectives were classified and never to be relieved to anyone, it wouldn't be a bad thing for him to hide his face. He was carrying some hair dye for the same reason. Yugao turned up less than 5 minutes later. They didn't bother talking, they both knew what needed to be done. Yugao made one gesture for them to leave and Naruto bolted. Then they ran right towards Wave Country to do things that no one would ever hear about. Naruto, despite the way he acted, was not a stupid person, not in the slightest. He knew the other reason that the old man wanted to help Wave was the fact that once they were liberated, they could become powerful trading partners. Which is why both he and Yugao could never have their secondary objectives recorded, because if it ever came out that Konoha ninja participated in terrorist plots against a public company, it would be damaging to the village's reputation. It really was a strange kind of irony the world operated under, black operations, the things that could never see the light of day due to how sensitive they were, and yet no one could do without them. Naruto put the thoughts out of his mind and followed Yugao. If they hurried, they should be able to make it to Wave in 2 days. 2 days later, Wave Country. Naruto landed on a branch above a group of thugs. He had originally wanted to find teammate first, but Yugao disagreed. First thing on the agenda was indiscriminate slaughter of some of Gato's men. Naruto loosened Benahims in her sheath before taking a deep breath. He dropped from the branch as he unsheathed her. Benahim's blade glowed crimson in the sunset. The blade tore through the air, and the thug under him didn't even have time to scream before the cold steel severed his spine. Naruto immediately brought the blade across his body, cutting another 2 stomachs open. He had a little morbid fascination towards the way the men's blood was reflected in the dying light. The final thug just turned around in time to feel Benahim go through his ribcage and into his lung. Naruto grimaced beneath his mask. That was a slow death. He withdrew Benahim and slit the man's throat before sighing. He felt Yugao arrive above him. That's the 3rd lot I've taken out, Nico, you think that's enough to get him nervous? Naruto looked up. Yugao was decked out in full Anbu gear, not that it was surprising, so was he. Like the old man said, the details of their secondary objectives could never come out in the open. That carried with it the unspoken terms that their identities could never be attached to anything related to the secondary objective. Yugao looked down at the hyperactive blonde and the carnage that surrounded him. The standard Anbu gear he wore was stained with dry blood. Yugao smiled behind her mask. So far her student was handling things well, but he was right, it was time to call it quits for now. Gato should be scared enough by their little display to send more men out to the field, and it would be his death. Okay, that's enough for now, let's go. Oni, rendezvous at the camp in 20. Yugao disappeared. Naruto, though he was taking a different route, was close behind. I wrote this segment listening to Hope's theme from Final Fantasy Xi, and This Is Your Home also from French Frank Xi. Try listening to Hope's theme, it goes pretty well with this scene, epically the last part. Their joint camp was hidden in the forest surrounding the village Team 8 was staying in. It wasn't much, just 2 tents and a fire pit. The kind of place that could have all evidence of its existence erased in only a few minutes, and that was exactly the point. After all, no one was to even know that they were doing things against Gato. Yugao dropped from the treetops into the middle of their small camp, followed by Naruto. No more than a few seconds later, Yugao made a few quick hand signs. Majin. Kokoni Arazu no Jutsu. Yugao sighed before reaching up and removing her mask before motioning Naruto to do the same. Yugao smiled at her charge. That was some good work, Naru-chan. You and I took out a total of 9 groups between us. Yuga was trying to keep Naruto from reflecting on the fact that they had killed over 26 people. Moreover, I got some good information listening to some of them talk. Seems like Gato's men hang around in a bar down by the waterfront. Naruto nodded, sure, it was good information, but how Yuga wanted to use it was what mattered. The better news is that they are looking for a new waitress along with some live music. She said, looking devious. Naruto broke out into a grin of his own. What do we do after you find out what we need to know? Naruto inquired. He was genuinely interested in what his sensei's plans were after they gained the information. Yuga's cheerful demeanor changed like it was never there to begin with. Naruto knew what she was about to say, but let her continue anyway. If there was one thing he had learned about Yuga over the last few months was that she hated fighting. If there was a peaceful way to solve a situation, she would take it. That didn't mean she wouldn't fight, just that she preferred not to. Naruto sighed. He got the feeling that the plan they would execute wouldn't be without civilian casualties. After extracting the information we need, Naruto, you and I will place explosive tags in excess around the bar. Then at the time when the most of Gato's men are inside, we will detonate the tags, after which both you and I will kill any survivors and help any people that were caught in the blast that were not Gato's men. Yuga finished with a tone of finality. Naruto nodded before walking over to his temporary sensei and smiling at her. So I guess we will rendezvous with teammate in 2 days' time then. He tried to think of happier things and take his sensei's mind off the fact that they were going to kill a lot of people tomorrow. Some who more likely than not were only working for Gato because they didn't have any other way to make a living. A fact like that didn't excuse them, but it did make it harder to kill them. Naruto knew that was what people call the divine economy. In the end, some people had to die for others to live. That was just a fact of life. So Naruto tried to distract both himself and Yuga from the fact that tomorrow both their hands would be bathed in more blood than they were today. The hinged Naruto walked into the Devil's Nest, a bar on the waterfront. It was more or less what one would expect. Large and gaudy. Well, at least now he knew why Yuga wanted him to learn the guitar. He was tailor-made for information jobs in bars by providing live music. He sighed as he looked at his hinge's reflection in the glass. He was disguised as a man in his early 20s, dirty blonde hair with a white shirt, a green jacket with white diamonds embroidered on its hem, green pants, and wearing traditional Jetta sandals and a green striped bucket hat. He had even changed his eye color to gray. All in all, he looked like someone completely different. He sighed again before walking into the bar, guitar case on his back, though this one was not a normal case. It had been specially outfitted to carry ninja weapons and Benihim. Naruto looked around the bar until his eyes came to rest briefly on Yuga's hinged state. Her hair had changed to vibrant green, and her face had gotten rounder. He stifled a chuckle that his demon of a teacher could look so unassuming and dare he say it cute before moving his gaze onto the bartender. He smiled as he walked over to the man. He was nothing special, gray hair, green eyes, standard suit, nothing out of the ordinary at all. "Hello, barkeeper-san," he said in an overly friendly voice, smiling at the man. The barkeep looked up at him in surprise before noticing the guitar case on Naruto's back and smiling at him. "Hear about the live music job?" the man inquired, sounding gruff. Naruto smiled back and nodded, though it did make him feel a bit sick as he did so. He was smiling at a man he was going to kill later. He felt like scum. But he kept up his smile nonetheless. He was a ninja, unlike most of the kids in his class. He knew what that meant from day one. At some point in time he would have to look a man in the face and lie to him while plotting his death. Not that people had not done it to him. He pushed the thoughts aside time enough for self-doubts and reflection later. Now he had a job to do. "Indeed, I am barkeep-san," he said in his best cheerful voice. The barkeeper looked him up and down before nodding to himself and looking Naruto in the eye again. "I am going to need to see how you play first, just a formality, but I can't just hire anyone who walks in the door. I need you to be both reliable and to be good at using that guitar on your back. I hope you won't mind giving me and my new employee a demonstration, will you?" Naruto smiled at the barkeeper as he gestured to the now hinged Yuga. "Bashiro, get over here and help me judge if this new guy is any good at using the guitar." The hinged Yuga nodded to the barkeeper and walked over, not even sparing Naruto a second glance. Naruto pulled the guitar case off his back and opened it. Inside was his guitar. He would never admit it, but he was grateful to Yuga for making him learn the instrument. Beside helping him on information gathering, he often just played to relax. Naruto looked up at the bartender. "Anything in particular you would like to hear?" he asked in a conversational tone. He might not know the song they asked for, but he was told that it was always polite to ask first. The old barkeep shook his head and Mashiro shrugged. Naruto sighed before sitting down and placing the guitar in his lap and strumming a few random chords before smiling and launching into one of his favorite songs, the Fiesta de Guerra. One of the songs he knew that only required one guitar and no backing. Note: Fiesta de Guerra is an actual song, and I do recommend listening to it. The song was fast and upbeat, using a foreign rhythm, quick and sure strokes with the pick. He could see both the barkeep and Mashiro swaying along to the rhythm. He hit the halfway mark, his pick moving quickly and surely through the notes, his audience entrapped by the melody. The song slowed down slowly, but surely his pick hit less strings as the song finished. Both the barkeeper and Mashiro were looking at him with something akin to admiration. He smiled and took a short bow to them, smiling all the while. He wouldn't admit it, but he was proud of his skill. "So what do you think?" he asked the stunned barkeeper nonchalantly. The old barkeeper smiled at him before bursting out laughing. "That was great, kid, just great, and call me Hanyo, and you my young friend just got yourself a job. Can you start tonight?" The aging man asked, looking positively overjoyed he had live music again. Naruto nodded and his new boss smiled at him. "What's your name anyway, youngster?" he asked, joy still threatening to overwhelm him. His last musician had been chased out by Gato's thugs. He was happy as could be to find a new one. Naruto smiled at the older man looking at his hench. "My name's Kiskyu," he said, sounding happy. "You can call me Urahara Kiskyu." The bartender nodded at him, still looking overjoyed. "You start in 3 hours, Kiskyu-san. I would get ready if I were you. We are going to have one rowdy night." Naruto turned around so the old man missed the look on his face. "You're going to have a rowdy night, old man, you have no idea." Beniham hummed in agreement and sorrow. Naruto sighed as he watched the bar fill with more and more people. They all looked like Gato's thugs, everyone except the waitresses, and the old barkeeper seemed to work for Gato. He looked out over the ever-growing sea of heads towards Yugao, who gave him a very brief nod of her head. She had found the information they were looking for, and they would proceed as planned. Naruto stood up from his seat next to the bar and waved to the old man who had given him the job, as it were. It would have been nice if he could have told Hanyo and the other waitresses about the plan, but sometimes that was what needed to happen. Some of the innocent people in the bar would die so that others in the country could live. Naruto walked onto the stage that had been prepared for him. It was nothing special, just a small raised platform with a chair for him to sit in. Naruto smiled as he put the guitar case down by his feet and popped it open, taking out his 6-string classical guitar. If nothing else, he would give these people some of the best music he could play as a send-off. Unfortunately for now, that was the best he could do for the innocent people about to get caught up in the plan. With that in mind, he decided to start off with something upbeat. He saw the old man smile as he heard the first strings of Fiesta de Guerra being played. Yugao looked on as Naruto played to his audience. She smiled briefly as she heard the chords of his first song. Fiesta de Guerra had been one of the first songs he had learned. Yugao shook her head and went back to her duties as Mashiro. It was only 8 o'clock at the moment. According to the old man Hanyo, the bar was busiest around midnight to 2 am. That was when the plan would be carried out. Yugao sighed again and went back to serving drinks every now and then, placing an explosive seal at points on the building. Naruto looked at the clock. It was almost 1 am. He sighed and called for quiet from the mob of people in front of him. Surprisingly enough, they listened. He sighed. This would be his last song and likely the last music they would ever hear. "Okay," he said cheerfully while smiling at the crowd. "You've been one of the best audiences I have ever had." The men below erupted into cheers at that deceleration. Naruto looked around the bar. There were at least 300 people inside, not counting the employees. He fought back a grimace. "But this will be my last song for tonight." Naruto was surprised when most of the men booed him when he said that. Was he really that good? Now you can always come back tomorrow night and see me. I will be here for at least another month." The men cheered again. It seemed like they really did like his music. Naruto smiled. Even though none of them knew it, he had the perfect song to send them off with. "Okay, this will be my last song of the night, please enjoy. It's called Hope's Theme. Also a real song, by the way." Most of the men made odd faces at the song's name. He didn't blame them. His face had looked about the same when he had first started learning it. He smiled as his hands began to play. Every chord hit perfectly, and every note had a richness to it that no one could quite describe. Yugao just stopped and listened as Naruto played. It was a strange kind of song. She had never heard him play it before. It was slow and sad, but it had an undercurrent of hope to it, like the music was trying to tell you everything was going to be alright. She could see it from here. Naruto had a small smile on his face. Yugao started to smile herself, sad with a strong undercurrent of hope that sounded like Naruto alright. Slowly the melody began to trail off as the song ended. Naruto stood up and smiled to the crowd before bowing. The men and women shouted out applause and asked for him to play the song again next time. Naruto bowed one more time before walking off the stage, and then outside, he looked up at the full moon before sighing. He felt Yugao beside him and sighed again as he turned around, looking into her hench's now brown eyes, before nodding. Both of them jumped up onto the roofs opposite the bar before discarding the henches they were wearing. Naruto was dressed in his rip-off Anbu gear. He leaned down and strapped Beniham to his back and put on his Oni mask. Then just looked to the sky and counted to 100. He looked back down at the building. He gulped. He really didn't want to do this, but it had to be done. Naruto steeled his heart and said one word to start the slaughter. 2 fingers raised in front of his face in the ram hand sign. Katsu. All hell broke loose, the building exploded from the ground up. All the explosive notes that Yugao and he had placed on the building went off in 3 stages. First, the ground floor, the seals down there collapsed the exits, so the people inside couldn't flee. Second, the tags on the main supports would go, bringing the roof of the building down on the now trapped people. Finally, the explosive tags that were left on the ground floor would detonate, killing off most if not all of the survivors. Naruto grimaced behind his mask as he watched the last lot of tags go off. He could still hear people screaming inside. He drew a kunai. He wouldn't use Benihim for this. She deserved to be used in battle, not whatever this was, and jumped off the roof for the final stage of the plan, to kill off any of the survivors that worked for Gato, and hopefully save 1 or 2 that didn't. Naruto moved amongst the burning corpses. So far he had put down 3 of Gato's men, but he could still hear the screaming. He saw Yugao working not too far away. Kunai bloody. Naruto took a shuddering breath and walked forward, coming to another burned corpse. He looked down. It was the body of Hanyo, the barkeeper. From the looks of things he had died almost instantly, at least judging by the hole through his chest. Yugao tapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, the townspeople are coming, time to make ourselves scarce." Naruto nodded and watched as Yugao jumped onto a nearby roof and started running. Naruto rubbed the scroll containing his guitar, still looking at the corpse. "Thanks, old man." He thought, "Hope you enjoyed the music." Before jumping onto the roof and running back to the campsite by a different route, Naruto could smell the smoke even out in the woods. He wondered, would the screams he heard haunt him? The Mizuki incident didn't. Then again, Mizuki was trying to kill him. Some of those people were simply wrong time, wrong place, like Hanyo. Would the old man's laughter haunt his dreams? How about the waitresses? Would their faces haunt his waking hours? Naruto shook off his, admittedly, morbid thoughts. There would be time to wonder about his possibly decreasing mental stability later. Naruto jumped into the campsite opposite Yugao, who was standing and waiting for him. As soon as he landed, Yugao started making hand signs to hide the camp. "Meijin. Kokoni Arazu no Jutsu." Naruto reached up and took his mask off before throwing some kindling in the fire pit, then sitting down next to a wood pile, ready to throw the larger pieces on when needed. Yugao stood looking at him for a minute before sitting down opposite Naruto and removing her mask and sighing. She looked over at the little kid she had been training and gave him her best smile. "You did good, Naru-chan, you did good." Naruto just looked back, not smiling. "Was it worth it?" he said in what was close to a monotone. Yugao almost flinched hearing the dead-sounding voice coming out of Naruto's mouth. Before sighing and looking at the fire for a second as if to collect herself. "It was." She acknowledged, sighing. She was in Anbu for a reason, to protect Konoha from its enemies and help its people. But doing things like this, seeing innocent people die because against the whole their lives were insignificant, that was one thing she had never gotten used to and prayed she never did. Naruto shot her a curious glance and Yugao sighed before elaborating. "Ado used a bar as record-keeping stash." Naruto nodded. Naturally, the documents kept there weren't much, but one of them referenced a major information hub located out past the docks. "It seems like most of his illegal business documentation is stored there. If we can break in and get our hands on the more sensitive stuff, we should know the location of some of his more exotic businesses." Naruto sighed. That had been about what he had been expecting, still he had been hoping for more. "So we still meeting up with teammate in the morning?" Yugao nodded to him and Naruto stood up before walking to his tent. "Don't forget." Yugao yelled out after him. "Inuzuka Kiba can track by scent, seal the clothes you're wearing, and take a bath with some of the blood cleaning agent. That way he hopefully won't be able to connect us with the explosion or anything else we do from here on out." Naruto gave a tired wave over his shoulder and went inside his tent. Kami, damn it, he was tired. Naruto was hit by the familiar feeling of water crashing over his body as he entered his mindscape. Opening his eyes, he looked up. The clouds seemed darker than before for some reason. It looked like it was night. What was going on that had never happened before? He grimaced before turning towards the Hokage tower. He wondered for a second if he should look for Benihim or let her come to him. Naruto felt his senses go wild and scream at him to dodge. Naruto leaped to the side as Benihim came down from a building directly behind his and slashed at his unprotected back. Naruto looked at the Crimson Princess. Nothing seemed out of place, so why would she attack him? He drew his copy of Benihim from her sheath and positioned it defensively in front of him. He watched the Crimson Princess in front of him with trepidation. She had never acted like this before, and that scared him. "Benihim, are you okay? What's wrong, Heim?" The princess didn't answer and just charged him again, sword aimed for his jugular. Naruto brought his own sword up to block. Sparks shot out from where their blades connected. Naruto pointed his index finger at Benihim. HADO number 4 by Akurai. The white lightning lanced out, looking to pierce the Zanpakuto spirit. In an incredible display of both skill and coordination, Benihim leaned backwards and just let the attack pass her by, using the absolute thinnest of margins for her dodge. Naruto grimaced. This was ridiculous. She had dodged his Kido at point-blank range, but the one question remained, why? Why was she doing this? Naruto charged, swinging his sword down at Benihim's dominant arm, trying to end the fight by disarming her. He saw a small smile on her face as her sword came up to meet his. He twisted his neck. The Mzuri that Benahem aimed at him cut his cheek instead of above his eyebrow like Benahem was aiming for. Benahem disengaged as she spun, letting out a high kick at Naruto's head that he countered by leaning back and twisting and trying to give her a roundhouse kick to the stomach. Benahem blocked it with an open palm. Both Zanpakuto and her wielder backed away from each other, Naruto breathing hard, Benahem not even sweating. Naruto's eyes widened as Benahem licked the blade of her sealed self before giving him a bloodthirsty grin. Akiro, Benahem, the katana in her hands changed into its Shikai state. Naruto grimaced before pointing his blade-sealed form at the Crimson Princess. Akiro, Benahem, his own blade changed to match hers. They screamed a war cry at each other and charged again. The newly formed Shikai blades clashed in the main street of the empty Konoha. Naruto's sword cut towards Benahem. Up, down, left, right, parry, disengage, use Kido. The fight sped up. Benahem's sword struck faster, and Naruto was hard-pressed to do anything but defend. The Crimson Princess jumped into the air and began spinning as she came down. Her sword crashed into his, forcing itself straight through his guard and cutting him badly on his chest before her sword came down again and locked with his. Benahem smiled at Naruto as her sword began to glow red and she whispered one word. Naked red light ran from her sword and blasted Naruto backwards through 3 buildings. Naruto could feel the pain welling up from his wounds. That last attack had given him a matching gash on the other side of his chest. What the hell was that? Naruto tried to move but couldn't. What the hell's wrong with me? My legs, they won't move, my arms won't come up. What the hell was that attack? He could hear the rubble around him moving as someone walked over it. Benahem stopped and looked at her wielder as he tried to get up. Naruto forced himself onto one knee and looked at the Crimson Princess in front of him. She was still unharmed, even after he threw everything he had at her. She didn't even have a single injury. Kami, damn it, that was pathetic. That was just a damn pathetic. He forced himself onto 2 feet and raised his sword before him in trembling hands. Benahem looked at him before slashing at him again. The force of the hit sent him through what was left of the building and back onto the street. Benahem just walked out of the destroyed building like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Naruto struggled to get back on his feet. This is pathetic, Naruto, like this you're absolutely pathetic. You didn't like what you had to do earlier. So what, if you hate what you have to do, then become stronger so you don't have to do things that way. All that I see reflected in you right now is worthless fear. That is what is stopping you from advancing, making you hesitate. Didn't I tell you when we first met? Abandon your fear. Look forward. Move forward and never stop. You'll age if you pull back. You'll die if you hesitate. Have you already forgotten my words, Naruto? Benahem looked on as Naruto struggled to stand before raising her released state over her own head, where it began to glow red. Thanks to the fact you had to kill people that you deemed as innocent, you have stopped moving forward. I won't put up with that, Naruto. That which is holding you back right now is naught but worthless fear, and it is all I can see reflected in your blade. Can you understand, Naruto? Why your blade reflects your fears, look. Benahem screamed at him and pointed at the heavens above them. The clouds in the sky was black, no clouds were there anymore, no light, nothing, simply an endless inky blackness above. Because you gave into your fear, yes, the rain clouds have stopped gathering, but in exchange this world has become devoid of light. Benahem yelled at him in anger. It is all because you cannot move forward, Naruto. Tell me, have you reached the limits of your resolve? In our battle earlier, all your sword spoke to me of as absurd fears. How disappointing it was. When you dodged, you were afraid of getting cut. When you attacked, you were afraid of cutting me. Even when you blocked, you were afraid of dying. The red light of her released state grew brighter as Benahem continued talking. Yes, right now all your sword speaks to me of is absurd fear. That is not what is necessary in battle. Is not fear. Nothing can be born of that. If you dodge, I won't let them cut me. When you block, I will not die, and when you attack, you will cut them. Her Shikai began to glow even brighter, the red light taking on the crimson color of blood in the now black world. Well, can't you see it, Naruto? My resolve to cut you reflected in my blade. Naruto looked at Benahem for a second before standing. He could still feel his legs buckling beneath him, his arms could barely move. He brought the Shikai state of Benahem back over his head, the stance he normally reserved for the Raiden. Channeling Riryaku into the blade, pushing more and more into it. Was Benahem right? Was he really this pathetic? His own sword began to glow red and call out to the one in Benahem's hands. The Crimson Princess gave him the first honest smile she had since he arrived, and he found one on his own face in return. It seems like you can still muster the resolve to move forward, Naruto. She said in her sing-song voice before her smile turned feral. Let me test just how far you can go with it. Benahem and Naruto both swung their blades at the other. Naruto wasn't sure what the attack he was using was, but it sure as hell wasn't the Raiden Crimson Light like the night he killed Mizuki flashed out from his blade to meet Benahem's own light. The two forces collided and fought for dominance, each straining against the other, before cancelling each other out and destroying their surroundings. Benahem stood at one edge of the crater that their attacks had created. It formed a giant X in the middle of the mindscape, not that it really mattered, the mindscape would just repair itself eventually. Benham used Shunpo to reach her master who was barely holding on to his consciousness before hugging him. "You did good, Naruto-kun, you did good. See, you can still move forward," Benham said, smiling at him. The holes in the cloud cover above were pushing through sunlight once again. "Thank you, Benham." Naruto gave her a weak smile before passing out. Benham smiled and laughed to herself. He didn't have to be thankful to her. After all, she was his partner and he was her everything. She would always do her best to protect him no matter what. Naruto felt oddly refreshed when he woke up the next morning, though he guessed it probably had something to do with Benham questioning his resolve to move forward in addition to kicking his ass. He couldn't even be angry at the Crimson Princess as in the end everything she did was to help him move forward and protect him from the trials ahead. He smiled to himself as he walked out of his tent and jumped in the nearby river. After all, Yugao was right, Kiba could track by scent, no need to have him finding out about their extra activities on the mission. Yugao woke up to the sounds of splashing water before groaning. She really wasn't a morning person, but then again she was meeting Team 8 today. Yugao drew herself sluggishly out of her sleeping bag. She wondered how Naruto was doing after last night. The blonde that she had been with for the last 5 months didn't seem to take what they did well, not that it was surprising the first time she had done things like that. She couldn't sleep properly for a week. It took a few months of therapy before she could do her job again. Killing innocents was never easy, and despite what people said, it didn't get easier over time, and if it did get easier for some people, then they were monsters. Naruto put on his normal clothing, though he did debate about the trench coat before putting it on anyway. The steel guards on the arms were just too useful for him not to wear the coat at almost all times. He slung Benham over his back and refilled his explosive note pouches. He would need to see Kenichi-san about getting some more, he noted, before turning to see Yugao coming out of her tent. He almost laughed at her disheveled state. Let it never be said that his teacher Yuzuki Yugao is a morning person. While Yugao bathed, Naruto busied himself packing up and erasing all traces of the camp and sealing the tents into a storage scroll on his belt. He looked around. Yugao was still bathing. Naruto sighed before drawing Benham and placing her on his lap. He had time for a quick chat after all. "Haim. You there, Haim?" He could hear the sounds of Benham grumbling as she woke up. He stifled another laugh. He found it quite cute. "I am, Naruto-kun, anything you wanted?" came the sleepy-sounding voice inside his head. "Nothing really, just thanks for beating the hell out of me, I think I needed that." He let the silence stretch for a few seconds. "You know, I never actually pictured myself saying that to someone. Thank you for kicking the ever-living crap out of me. It really put me back on the straight and narrow. I honestly can't believe I said that." He heard the musical laughter coming from Benham. Naruto felt relieved. He didn't want her brooding on the fact she hurt him. Even if it was for a good reason, she would probably do it too. "Look alive, Naruto-kun, your sensei's back and I think she will want to know you're alright with what you had to do last night. You're okay with it, right?" Naruto gave a mental grimace. Was he alright with what he did? Probably not, even after Benham had beaten the emo out of him. What they did still didn't feel right to him, and he told Benham as much. The Crimson Princess eyed before considering her partner's problem. Killing innocent people would never be easy for him. Not that it should be. She would be appalled with him if it ever became so, but he might have to do it again, and she would need to help give him a reason to live with himself for doing so. "Naruto-kun, do you know how many people live in Wave?" Naruto gave her a negative. He was sure that the Ninja Academy probably had a lesson on it somewhere, but he couldn't remember. Benham went through Naruto's old memories looking for what she needed. She smiled at finding it. "Naruto-kun, the land of waves is home to almost 9,000 people." Naruto's eyes widened. A small island like this had close to 9,000 people on it, but the mission parameters put Gato's men at around 800. How could only 800 men control over 10 times that many people? He asked Benham as much. The Crimson Princess considered her answer carefully before replying. "The people are scared of them, Naruto-kun. I don't know how, but Gato took away this country's hope. That and they are scared of dying. Those thugs you killed off have weapons and likely some experience, no match for even a genin ninja, but they could easily kill most people in Wave. That is why the Hokage told you not to let anyone inherit control of a functioning Gato corporation, because they would just get more men and do this again. It is also why you were told to assassinate Gato, because someone who does things like this doesn't deserve life." Benham finished almost snarling in distaste at what Gato had and was doing. The Crimson Princess took a deep breath as to what she needed to get across to him. Naruto had led a hard life. He could understand what she was about to tell him, or at least she hoped he could. "Naruto-kun, not counting Gato's men, how many people were in that bar last night?" she asked not unkindly. Naruto thought about it for a second before sighing. "Around 10 to 15. He sent back sighing again as he remembered the old barkeeper's face. "Naruto-kun, tell me something. Is it possible to save everyone?" Benham asked, sounding sad. Naruto almost snorted in disbelief. Of course you couldn't save everyone. That was just a child's dream and impossibility amongst impossibilities. His breath caught in his throat. He understood what Benham was trying to tell him now. He didn't like it, but he understood. That's right, Naruto-kun, you can't save everyone, that is just an impossible dream. So what I need to ask you next is, if you can't save everyone, then what is the right answer when it comes to saving others? Naruto grimaced. What was the right answer when one could not save everyone? Not the idealistic answer that he would like to give her. What was the right answer? The right answer, Benham-chan, is that when you can't save everyone, is to save as many people as possible regardless of the cost. He could feel the sadness coming off the Crimson Princess as he gave his answer to her, feeling mildly disgusted with himself. He sighed before relaxing as he heard Benham's voice again. That's right, Naruto-kun, that is the right answer when you can't save everyone. However, I won't tell you that it is a good thing either, it simply is. Naruto could feel the sadness that permeated Benham's every word as she said that, before she sighed. But how do you live with yourself after condemning innocent people to death? He asked a person who was closest to his heart. Benham sighed at the question before answering. Naruto-kun, in Wave, what are you fighting for? Is it because of your duty as a shinobi? To test yourself and your strength? Or to help the people of Wave find a better future? Naruto considered the question. It wasn't exactly an easy one to answer. Why was he fighting? Was it his orders? Naruto shook that thought aside. He had seen all the poverty that Geto had put these people through. He wanted to help them. I am fighting because I want to help them. He spoke back to the Crimson Princess on his lap before he heard her sigh. Then if you are fighting to help them, Naruto-kun, if the cost of freeing Wave from Geto is the 15 lives, if the innocent people in that bar a good price to pay. Naruto considered the question was 15 lives in exchange for almost 9,000, a good trade of course it was. That didn't make it any less bitter though. Benham heard his thoughts and chuckled. Of course it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, Naruto-kun, if it didn't, then you would be worse than the person you are trying to get rid of. When you kill someone, Naruto, ask yourself what you're killing them for, and then ask yourself if you're willing to keep killing for that goal. Naruto thought about what had happened last night. The bar, the explosion, was it worth it? Were those 15 lives he took that didn't deserve to die worth it? Yes, he decided they were. If 15 had to die for 9,000 to live, then that was a good trade, no matter how bitter it made him feel. Benham acknowledged that he didn't have to like it. Naruto-kun, I told you last night, didn't I? If you don't like the way you had to do things last night, then become strong enough not to have to do things that way. If you gain enough power to stop that from happening, then great, but just make sure you gain and then use that power for the right reasons, or else you will be no better than Geto. Naruto smiled. Trust Benham to give him good advice, and better yet help him solve a problem that he would probably have been thrashing out on his own for weeks. Thanks, Haim. He just got a laugh in return before standing up and looking at his sensei. Yuago looked into Naruto's cerulean blue eyes. They were so full of life, so different than what they were last night. Ready to go, sensei? The blonde-haired wonder that she called her student asked. Yugao smiled back at him. Last one there has to cook for all of the next out of Konoha mission we have together. Yugao said, smiling wider before shooting off into the trees, laughing at Naruto's yell of unfair. Her smile was smaller now. The kid would be fine, and that fact alone warmed her heart. They made fairly good time to Tezuna's house, arriving shortly before 7. Yuago directed him to hide out of the way. Still close enough to be within striking distance should something go wrong. Naruto hoped it didn't. They still had an information cache to raid tonight. The last thing he needed was more fighting today. He almost sighed in relief when Kiba opened the door. Something was going right. Hopefully the rest of the day would follow suit, though he doubted it. Who the hell are you? Yugao sighed at the way Kiba addressed her. The kid needed some lessons in etiquette. She looked him up and down. Blue shinobi sandals, gray pants, fur jacket. Well, at least he wasn't wearing bright orange like Naruto used to, though by the smell of him, he could use a bath. The kid would get his team killed by a scent tracker like himself unless he started having better personal hygiene. Kiba at the moment was trying to repress a nosebleed. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, sweet Kami, she is hot. His eyes lingered on her legs and breasts before going back to her eyes. Okay, Kiba, play it cool, you're an alpha after all. And Izuzuka, the pinnacle of masculinity. Hell, you're even a ninja. That doubles, no, triples, you're awesome. Just play it cool and she will be all yours and in the sack in a flash. Play it smooth and cool, Kiba. As such, he formulated the best follow-up he could to his early statement. LL, let me invite you in PP, pretty lady. Naruto came very, very close to breaking all of the stealth training that Yugao had given him and the Forest of Death had refined and laughing his ass off. Smooth, Kiba, real smooth. Yugao almost sighed. She heard the slight shifting of movement from Naruto's hiding place and knew it wasn't to get a better view of the situation. The kid was about to laugh his ass off. Just what she needed, another Inyazuka horn dog trying to get into her pants. A lot of Inyazuka men had tried that before. It took a lot of self-control not to castrate them on the spot. Still, she mused she could always sick Naruto on him in a sparring match for her honor or some such and deal with him like that. Yugao filed that idea away for later. It held some merit. My eyes are up here. She snapped as Kiba's eyes began to wander to her chest again. The genin looked straight back up, looked like Nai-chan had put a little of the fear of righteous feminine fury into him. I would like to speak to your Jonin sensei Yuhi Kurenai. I and my student are your backup. I am Jonin Yuzuki Yugao. It was a little formal, but serving in Anbu would do that to a person after all orders, and such needed to be relayed in the clearest form possible. Unfortunately, most of the time that meant formalities, especially when you were an Anbu captain like her and regularly made reports to the Hokage and, shudder, the council. Biba looked her up and down again. Are you sure you could be an enemy ninja after all? He started drooling as his nose began to bleed. Maybe I should strip search you just to make sure you aren't a threat to the client. Yuga resisted the urge to punch Kiba. She took it all back. This kid needed a dose of feminine fury, and he needed it right now. Luckily for Kiba, she restrained herself as much as she may like to. She wasn't allowed to hurt a genin, especially one that had a different sensei to her. Unfortunately for Kiba, however, Naruto had no such complication about hitting the Inyazuka. Kiba's first indication that Naruto was hiding nearby was the black and gray blur speeding out of the trees. Right before the aforementioned blonde's fist made contact with Kiba's face, sending the dog-loving Inyazuka back into the house and alerting everyone inside to their presence at the door. Yugao fought down the compulsion to laugh. The blonde had acted so differently when they had met again. It was nice to know that there was still a spark of that impulsive little spitfire in him. Naruto looked at the hallway that Kiba was laying in after being unceremoniously removed from his door guarding duties by the blonde's fist. His eyebrow was twitching in frustration and more than a little anger. Stupid mutt, they come all the way out here to pull him and his team's ass off the fire, and what do they get? His teacher gets belittled by the Inyazuka, looking her up and down like a piece of meat, and then he flat out asks to see her naked. Yugao might be willing to overlook it, though he had the feeling it was more to do with some political bullcrap. That was the reason she didn't deck him. But oh no, not him. He was under no such complication, and right now beating down the Inyazuka was taking priority over everything else. He took a step into the house, ignoring the sounds of surprise from within. No one looked or talked to one of his precious people like that. The Inyazuka was getting neutered tonight, no questions asked. He felt a pressure on his shoulder and looked up. Yugao had her hand on him and looked stern, but he could see the amusement dancing in her eyes. Oh, he would get scolded for this later, that he didn't doubt in the least, but he could tell from the way she looked Yugao wouldn't mean a word of it. That's enough, Naruto, time to meet the others, right, Night-chan? Naruto looked up from the slowly siding up form of Kiba and saw Kurenai, Shino and Hinata looking at him strangely, though he did note Hinata looked a little red in the face for some reason. Before he looked back down to Kiba, who was looking at him in surprise before yelling what the other three were thinking. Naruto. What the hell are you doing here? Yugao sighed. She could tell already this was going to be a long mission. 1 hour later, and that's why we're here. Yugao finished recounting the events that led to them becoming teammates back up. Leaving out of course the sensitive and supposedly non-existent details of their secondary objectives, though Naruto didn't doubt that Kurenai would learn them soon enough. After all, they were ninjas and buildings didn't just explode on their own after all, amongst all the other things that would be happening later. Wait. Kiba started. Let me get this straight, you. He pointed at Yugao and was smart enough not to let his eyes wander, especially around Kurenai. She was called a pervert's worst nightmare for a reason after all. And you. He pointed at Naruto with a disbelieving look on his face. We're sent as our backup against Momochi's abuser and that weird hunter nin freak guy, am I right so far? Naruto and Yugao nodded, wondering where Kiba was going with this. He is an A-rank missing nin, and the guy is a complete monster. Hell, we only got away thanks to some really fast running and timely genjutsu cast by Kurenai-sensei. Then for backup, that old man sends us some no-name Jonin and the dead last dope from the academy. He glared at Naruto for a second before continuing. Why the hell would he do that? Some dead last loser and some stupid no-name ain't gonna be any help at all against abuser. Hell, I bet I could do a better job than they will. Kiba finished his mini-rant, breathing deeply. Naruto's hand twitched towards Beniham on his back. The mutt was paying for that comment. Okay, he would admit that he was the dead last in the academy. Though mostly it was because of the teachers there sabotaging him, but still both Yugao and him had come to help his ungrateful ass. Then the first thing he does is insult them. It was going to be hard to work with Kiba after that, not to say he wouldn't do it, but still it was obvious that Kiba didn't know how to treat his supposed comrades. Moreover, what he said about Yugao was annoying him. Some no-name Jonin could kick Kiba's ass any day of the week. He had backup. What the hell was the mutt complaining about? Apparently he wasn't the only one thinking along these lines either, as Yugao spoke up. Oh, I'm some no-name Jonin, am I? She said, a sickly sweet smile on her face. Naruto felt a little sorry for Kiba. Yugao had that same smile on her face right before he woke up in the forest of death. My student may have been the dead last in your academy, but that counts for shit out here. She continued, still in that sickly sweet tone. We were sent as your backup for a reason, the reason being you can't handle the mission, so we have to pick up the slack, dog boy. Also, let me make one thing clear, Inyazuka, if you ever insult me or Naruto again, I can and will beat you into the floor. Do I make myself clear? Naruto felt really sorry for Kiba right about now. Yugao was pissed, he guessed with all that ogling her at the door, then asking to see her naked. Put on top of making her skills out to seem like nothing as some no-name as Kiba put it, had really pissed Yugao off. The look she was giving Kiba right now had the Inuzuka cowering in his seat, not that Naruto blamed him, he would be too in Kiba's position, Yugao could be scary as hell when she wanted to be. Finally. Yugao continued as if she hadn't just threatened to put Kiba into hospital. If you really think you're all that hot stuff, why don't you just fight, Naruto, so we can all see just what a big man you are. Yugao finished sarcastically, she mused Naruto must be having more of an effect on me than I thought. Naruto nodded to everything Yugao said right up to the fight Naruto part where he stopped and looked up at Yugao in horror. Not at having to fight Kiba, he doubted that his former classmate had been put through the same kind of hellish training he had. No, he could probably win that fight. What he was horrified about was the fact Yugao wanted him to fight when they had to raid an information cache later that night. That alone was going to drain him, but she wanted him to fight someone before that too, that was both cruel and unusual. Kiba burst out laughing looking at Naruto's face after that fight comment from Yugao. Me fight the dead last. He almost fell out of his chair laughing. Now that would be a one-sided fight, I mean come on look at him. He was pathetic at Taijin and ninjutsu then, and even I can tell nothing's changed, I am still top dog, and he is still a failure as a ninja. Kiba finished smugly, Kurenai silently nodded to herself behind him. She didn't have anything against Naruto as a person, nor did she blame him for his burden, but what Kiba said was true, according to all the academy reports Naruto was a failure of a ninja. Naruto took a deep breath to calm himself down, though his hand did still twitch towards Benihim's hilt. The old him would have been yelling at Kiba and challenging him to a fight right about now, but thanks to a crash course in being a ninja, courtesy of Yugao in the Forest of Death, he kept his cool. If just barely, most of him still wanted to hit Kiba for his comments, but he had put up with worse over the years after all. And look at the katana on his back, I bet he doesn't even know how to use it. After all, anyone who taught this failure how to use a weapon must be a failure of a teacher not to find anyone better. Kiba was just boasting now and everyone knew it, the real question at this point was whether or not he believed his own bullshit. Naruto's slowly lessening patience ran out at Kiba's comment about Benihim. Not that the Izuzuka knew he had insulted the person closest to Naruto, though it would be debatable if he would care even if he knew. Would you care to repeat that, Kiba? Naruto asked in a neutral tone, he would give the moron one chance to take back what he said, and if he didn't, well Naruto had no problems in beating him into the floor over this. Kiba smirked at Naruto, he loved having the opportunity to remind everyone he was top dog as he put it. Sure, he said shrugging. I said whoever taught you how to use that katana on your back is a failure, why you going to do something about it? His answer came in the form of a kunai aimed at his throat, Naruto made sure to throw it slowly enough it could be dodged. After all, he wasn't trying to kill Kiba, just hammer a point home. Kiba threw himself to the floor to avoid the blow and looked up at Naruto in a disbelieving fashion. He stood up from the table and looked at the Inuzuka. Kiba, you me outside, now. He yelled the last bit at Kiba, whose eyes were the size of dinner plates. After all, he was a clan heir, no one had ever thrown an attack with a chance of killing him. That was not so for Naruto, though he had been on the receiving end of attacks that could kill him for years. Naruto walked straight out the door, not even waiting to hear Kiba's answer. Kiba picked himself off the floor and ran out after Naruto, a snarl on his face. How dare that dead last embarrass him in front of everyone. Tsunami walked back into the living room from the kitchen, bringing with her some tea. Where are Kiba and Naruto going? The remaining shinobi looked away guiltily. It was true that Naruto shouldn't have attacked Kiba, but by the same token, Kiba shouldn't have said those things about Naruto. Kurenai thought about it for a second before reaching a compromise to tell Tsunami. They just need to blow off a little steam. She settled on, it wasn't technically a lie, it just wasn't quite the whole truth either. Yugao stood up and looked at the open door before sighing. I better go and make sure they are okay. She said, walking away. Kurenai followed after her. Making sure Kiba doesn't hurt Naruto too badly. Kurenai could tell the boy had improved, but it just wasn't possible for someone that could barely do the 3 academy jutsu to pull themselves up to the level of a clan heir in that period of time. She should know, as an orphan of a civilian family, she had always thought it was unfair that it took so much to catch up to people born into a shinobi clan. Yugao gave her an incredulous look before realization dawned on her face. After all, no one but her and Kakashi knew just what Naruto had been through over the last 5 months. Actually, I am going to make sure Naruto doesn't kill Kiba and call it an accident. Yugao finished somewhat sarcastically. After all, she had trained the kid for 5 months and he had survived, by himself no less, in the Forest of Death alone for 2 of them. If nothing else, that alone should get him respect from the shinobi that he met. Kurenai just looked at her like she was crazy. Yugao kept walking. After all, seeing was believing in cases like these. I am not being stupid, Akamaru. Kiba yelled at the white puppy on his head. He's the dead last, the dead kami damn last. I am not apologizing. Naruto sighed while making a mental note not to ask for Kiba on any infiltration missions he may do in the future. He stopped when they got to a decent-sized clearing before drawing Benihim and pointing her at Kiba. "Well then let's get started, shall we?" Naruto said in a smooth silk-like voice. The voice made it sound like he didn't even consider the other person an opponent, just an object. One that needed to be gotten rid of in short order, not that he actually believed that Kiba wasn't an opponent, he most assuredly was, but the voice was a form of psychological warfare. By sounding like he dismissed the person in front of him as a threat, they got angry, and if there was one thing Yugao had hammered into him, it was that an angry opponent wasn't much of an opponent at all. Kiba bristled. The dead last wasn't even treating him like a threat, that was just insulting. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the drill-like attack coming at him. He could see a way to neutralize it already, if he didn't mind killing Kiba, that was. As things stood, he jumped away from the center of the impact. His eyes widened again. Kiba literally tore through the ground, leaving a tunnel in the earth. Naruto grimaced. This was going to be harder than he thought. Maybe he really wasn't giving Kiba enough credit when he thought about his skills. Naruto looked around for a second at the clearing. Kiba was looking at him, a victorious smirk on his face. Naruto cocked his head to the side. Why would he look victorious? He missed. His eyes widened in realization as he threw himself to the left to avoid the drill-like blow from behind. The attack hit him on his left side. He felt his skin being ripped off and blood running down his side. He was extra glad he had paid the extra for those mesh fibers. Now if that attack could tear open his skin with them, he shuddered to think of what it would have done to him without them. He smiled at Kiba. "I forgot about your master, I won't make that mistake again." He loved the look on Kiba's face when he said Akamaru was his master. The outrage on it was absolutely priceless. Still, his witty banter had another reason behind it as well. He was finally ready to use it. He smiled as Kiba opened his mouth to yell back. Naruto took his chance and slashed Benihim towards the dog user. Zuri blood shot out of Kiba's forehead, blinding him in one eye. Naruto's smile turned bloodthirsty. There went Kiba's sense of depth perception. This fight was over. "Erg, what the hell did you do?" Kiba screamed at Naruto. He couldn't see out of his right eye anymore. Blood kept pouring down into it and it wouldn't stop. Naruto smirked at his bleeding opponent as he watched Kiba try to wipe the blood away. "You know, Kiba," he said conversationally, "head wounds do bleed a lot." Naruto's right leg went forward and bent a little. "If you don't have any cauterizing medicine then." He charged sword, leading the way. "There's no point in wiping." The bloodthirsty smile on Naruto's face only widened at the shocked look on Kiba's. Kurenai saw the lazy flick of Naruto's sword right before blood started pouring from a wound on Kiba's head. She was shocked. How the hell did something like that even happen? She had heard that some samurai in Tetsu no Kuni could do that, but Naruto had never been trained by a samurai, right? Her head flicked to Yugao, who was watching with a proud smile on her face. "And that is why I love teaching the brat," she said, looking at Kurenai with a small smirk in place. He just never stopped surprising a person. Naruto slashed downwards at Kiba's head. The Inyazuka dodged to his left, rolling out of the way. Benihim came back around in a vicious arc at Kiba's arm. The Inyazuka genin pulled out a kunai and stopped Benihim head on. They were close enough now. Kiba could see the bloodlust in Naruto's eyes, and it scared him. Beneath the surface, however, Naruto's mind was working a million miles a minute. If he stayed in a weapon lock with Kiba, Akamaru would get him from behind, and if he tried to fend off Akamaru, Kiba would get him. He wasn't exactly in the best of positions right now. Naruto's eyes focused on the kunai holding back Benihim. That could work. It would mean showing a little more than he was comfortable with to Kurenai, but it would work. "You know, Kiba, stopping my katana head on is pretty brave of you," Naruto praised. Kiba smirked and opened his mouth but was cut off. "Yep, you've got some big kojins doing that, but..." Naruto's grin turned feral. "But my katana ain't so sweet you can block her completely with just a crappy kunai," Naruto yelled and sent some of his Riryaku through Benihim's sealed form. Kiba's smirk turned into a look of horror as the katana in Naruto's hand sliced through his kunai like a hot knife through butter before slicing into his chest and cutting him open from left shoulder to right hip. Though in Naruto's defense it was a shallow cut, Kiba was in no danger of dying. Naruto threw Benihim up into the air and rushed forward. He placed his right hand on Kiba's left side and pivoted, sending Riryaku through the palm and slamming it into Kiba's body. Tesso, the palm strike plowed into the surprised Inyazuka's body and sent him flying like a rag doll across the clearing. Naruto wasn't about to waste this opportunity. This little sparring match was over. The AKUTM number 4. Hina with the yellow energy ribbon shot straight up and gripped Benihim's hilt. Naruto yanked the katana back down into his grip and placed the point of her blade at Kiba's throat. "My win, don't you think, Kiba? Now maybe you would like to tell me who the failure is." Kurenai's jaw was making very close acquaintances with the floor at this point. She did not just see that did not just happen. There was no way in hell that just happened. But as much as she tried to deny it, the more the truth became more and more glaringly apparent. Naruto, the dead last of his graduating class of genin, had just taken Kiba apart using nothing but taijutsu and weapons, discounting the strange supplementary jutsu. The very thing Kiba was the, admittedly self-proclaimed, best at using, and then there was that jutsu at the end. What was that? More and more questions started piling up and she got the feeling that it was just the tip of the iceberg. Naruto gave Kurenai and Yugao a cheery wave as he walked out of the clearing, leaving a beaten and dumbfounded Kiba behind. Kurenai turned to Yugao who was trying and failing to hide the amusement in her eyes. "I think we need to talk." Yugao just nodded her head. Naruto stopped just out of sight from the jonins that win hadn't come without a price, namely the injury he had sustained to his left side. Naruto sighed as he began to walk forward towards the house. He had let his arrogance get the best of him in that fight, and because he kept all his attention on Kiba, Akamaru found it easy to get the drop on him. Naruto grimaced before rubbing Benihim's hilt one way or the other. It wouldn't happen again. Time skip 1927 7:27 p.m. Information cache. The sky was overcast obscuring the light of the moon. For Naruto and Yugao this was a good thing. The information cache they were about to raid was situated in the center of the warehouse district on the docks. Fortunately there weren't any guards outside the warehouse itself. Unfortunately Yugao had seen almost 50 go inside over the course of the last hour. Naruto didn't have any problems in killing them, but 50 against 2 was bad odds, ninjas or not. He contemplated it for a second. If he was trying to kill 50 people inside a building without fighting them first, how would he go about it? He thought about it for a second and decided to go with using explosive tags again. So what if it was uninspired? It worked. It would require him to kill anyone he met silently though. "I'm a ninja that actually uses stealth. I wonder how rare those are," he muttered from beneath his Oni mask, the mask distorting his voice. It was an unfortunate fact he had picked up on. Most ninjas seemed to stay out in the open and fight just using flashy jutsu. He should know he used to be one of them when Yugao had started training him. The forest of death had quickly beaten it out of him and reinforced the need for stealth. He felt the radio in his ear buzz. "This is Nico, can you hear me, Oni?" Naruto muttered a quick affirmative. "Good, we are entering in 10. Find and store all incriminating documents into the storage scrolls. After which we will vacate the building and destroy it." Naruto nodded even though she couldn't see it. Explosive tag plan. From the other side of the warehouse Yugao nodded to herself. "Got that right. It might seem a little uninspired, but hey, it works right." Yugao paused for a second, biting her lip under her mask. "Are you going to be okay doing this?" She remembered the look in his eyes after the bar. No child should have that look in their eyes. Naruto thought back to the Asuka he had been treated to by Benihim. No way was he going through that again. "I'll be fine," Naruto said after a minute. There were no innocent people inside. He wouldn't have to kill people like that again. Never again if he got any say in it. Naruto breathed out. "I'll be ready to go in." Yugao could taste blood in her mouth and stopped biting her lip. She still felt very anxious about this, though it wasn't right to make a child do this, ninja or not. "Right, we move in 10. Keep radio silence unless necessary, Oni." Yugao got a hi in response and went back to planning her part of the break-in. Naruto used chakra to stick to the wall of the warehouse and ascended to the roof and walked over to a skylight. Cutting the lock, pulled the glass open and stuck himself to the roof before closing the skylight and hanging upside down on the inside of the building. Naruto dashed to a shadow-covered spot in a corner to observe the inside of the building. Most of it was taken up by crates with spots of clear ground, and for some reason 2 people guarding a crate. He radioed Yugao. "Nico, I've got 1 empty warehouse and 2 wanted samurai guarding a crate. Ideas?" Yugao stopped rummaging through the warehouse overseer's office drawer and grimaced. She hadn't been able to find anything incriminating in the offices. A guarded crate could mean a lot of things, but considering how much money Gato had, it was probably the entrance to an underground bunker. "Check for more guards. If there are none, then eliminate the current ones and destroy the bodies with a Kaiten jutsu. After that, hide again and wait for me to show up. I will make some clones to hinge into the guards. Just make sure you can remember their descriptions." "Understood, Nico, we'll execute and await further orders." Another thing Yugao had taught Naruto was proper radio etiquette, getting orders and acknowledgements across quickly and clearly so that everyone that heard them could understand. Naruto pulled back further into the shadows before walking across the wall for a better vantage point and drawing a pair of kunai. No jutsu could be used here right now. It would attract too much attention. Unless you counted the corpse burning jutsu, but that only created enough of a flame to burn a corpse, not like the assault jutsu. He knew they would make far too much noise. He kept to the shadows as he crept up behind the 2 unsuspecting dead men. He was keep a sharp ear and eye out for any backup they might have. So far nothing. Gato must have been very confident that no one would find the info cache, or just very arrogant to only have 2 guards at its entrance. Naruto was betting on the latter. He positioned himself above one of the men before dropping to the ground. The first guard didn't have time to scream as the kunai went through his skull and into his brain. Blood splashed onto Naruto's mask and clothing. Great, he was going to need to use the blood cleaning agent again. A second kunai was thrown at the other guard's neck, cutting off his yell stillborn as he struggled to breathe through his now wrecked throat, blood gurgling out of his mouth. Naruto retrieved his 2 kunai, even if he had extras no point in wasting them, he looked at them for another second before reconsidering and planning to dispose of them later, no point in keeping them if the smell of blood would help Kiba pick up on something. He sighed and turned back to the corpses on the floor and making hand signs Kaiten. Nensho Nakori no Justu Naruto exhaled bring the fire jutsu to bear the bodies on the floor, burned he could smell their skin sizzling and hear their bones cracking before nothing and in their place was a small pile of ash. Naruto looked at the blood on the floor before making more hand signs Suten. Takiasuku Mizu Shimi no Jutsu he exhaled a high-pressure stream of water the blood on the floor, mixing the two before firing off another Kaiten Jutsu and evaporating the water and blood before moving back to the shadows. The wait for Yugao he didn't have to wait too long the Nico mask Anbu dropped into the space that he killed the mercenaries in less than 5 minutes later and motioned him forward. Any problems? Naruto shook his head. Went off without a hitch, no sounds from inside the crate, though probably an entrance in the floor, unless I miss my guess. He added. What did the 2 guards look like? The first one was about 5'4", no shirt, black boots and an eye patch, looked about 32, and had black hair he was also fairly well muscled. Yugao nodded fixing the image in her mind. The other was about 21, white pants, purple hoodie, sandals, silvery white hair, lip piercing, and looked like an asshole you know the Uchiha sneer. Yugao nodded again smiling slightly behind her mask, the Uchiha sneer was the way Naruto referred to anyone with an arrogant look on their face after meeting Sasuke and the other Uchiha when they were still around, she couldn't call him wrong. Okay then. Yugao made the one day to be infamous cross-shaped hand seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A pair of fully solid Yugao clones appeared Anbu gear and all. Naruto's mouth was hanging close to the floor, solid clones actual solid fucking clones, imagine the pranking potential if he had that. The 2 clones made a hand seal of their own. Enj no Jutsu they said in tandem the illusion took over and 2 copies of the guards he had killed took the clone's place. Nico, you have got to teach me that when we get back. Naruto couldn't hide the awe and desire lacing his voice as he said that. Yugao smirked at her student's tone. We will see when we get back it is a kenjutsu for a reason after all, we're going to have to ask the Hokage before I can teach you. Naruto grumbled but agreed after all solid clones imagine the possibilities. Yugao stepped towards the shipping container and pushed the door open and rushed inside, both had Kuwanis ready to attack or defend at any moment. For naught though the container was deserted, Naruto sighed. Bad guys just don't try like they used to. He lamented and pointed at the 2 doors on the floor in plain sight. I mean they didn't even try to hide these. Yugao just nodded what could she say the kid was right she had kind of expected more. Naruto breathed out as another set of thugs passed under him, he was currently stuck to the ceiling by his hands and feet, waiting for the 2 men to leave. Yugao and he had descended into Gato's hidden and he used the word hidden lightly information storehouse. Around 1 hour ago and split up about 15 minutes after that he hadn't even heard from Yugao since considering her standing order for radio silence that wasn't surprising. But it also meant she hadn't found anything yet and they were still heading deeper into the base that was what worried him. He was still sticking on explosive tags every few minutes 4 or 5 on major walls, but what was worrying him was why the base was too large. There was no need for an information cache this large that meant it had a double function, but what that worried him. Naruto rounded another corner still sticking to the ceiling he had quickly learned this was the best way to travel around after all how many people looked up inside. Naruto stopped moving and sent chakra to his ears breathing out slowly and listened for anything suspicious. Creaking was coming from a room down the hall, along with the sound of chains. Naruto cocked his head to the side why chains and edged his was closer, he opened the door a crack and nearly threw up. 7 women chained up and as naked as the day they were born, one with a man thrusting in and out of her, Naruto was disgusted, Beniham was screaming for blood. The woman's eyes were silently screaming for help and he saw red. The door was thrown open and he charged the man had just enough time to turn around before Beniham's sweeping arc took off his head. Blood poured from the stump on the man's neck and yet the woman was looking at him in gratitude even with the gags in their mouths, he could see the gratitude in their eyes. Naruto sighed this was a major deviation from the plan, but like Yugao told him no plan survives contact with the enemy. He would just have to work with this he wasn't about to leave them here orders or no. Naruto looked each of the 7 up and down a few minor lacerations here and there, they were dirty a lot of dried semen on their bodies, but other than the lack of clothing they looked fine. Naruto looked at the gags again they most likely served a dual function, the first to keep the women from screaming the second to keep them from biting off their own tongues and killing themselves. Nico we've got a problem. Yugao paused in the act of sealing another file into a scroll she had hit the jackpot with this. Naruto's voice sounded edgy either something had gone horribly wrong or he had found something he wished he hadn't. What's the situation, Oni? She asked back in full Anbu mode, she heard her student draw a shuddering breath from the other side of the Raito. I found something that I really wished I didn't at any rate my situation at the moment is Fuber. Yugao's brow furrowed. Fuber fucked up beyond all recognition was an Anbu term that meant exactly what it sounded like. She sighed. Yugao just knew she wasn't going to like what she heard next, if she even agreed with it or not. Let me hear it, Oni, I just really hope whatever you've done is worth the shitstorm it's going to stir up. Naruto sighed before looking at the woman and steadying himself. I found a little room for Gatos, meant 7 women. They look like sex slaves like what the old man told us Gato was doing. As for their condition, slightly malnourished and sporting minor wounds, they also lack clothing, though compared against the others, that's a minor concern. Orders, Nico. Yugao felt a flash of rage coursing through her, tempered slightly by pride in her student for keeping calm, but what to do? Letting the women out would be more than a little difficult and attract a lot of attention, but she didn't think even for a second that Naruto would leave them there. She had what they needed. They were about to blow the place sky high, so they no longer needed to keep a low profile. There were also about 50 guards, and just 2 of them, those was not good odds. On the flip side, with the data she had gathered and the statements from people who had lived through something like this at the hands of Gato, she could deal a lot of damage to the corporation as a whole. Oni, how long did it take you to get where you are right now? Yugao's voice was all business. Have you finished placing all the explosive tags yet? No, not yet, but there is a major wall in this room, and I have done most of the base, or at least what your plan said were most of it anyway. Naruto responded. How many explosive tag balls have you got on you? The purple-haired Anbu asked. 10. Okay, then I want you to deploy 3 of them in your current room and then space the rest out as you see fit as you escape with the women. Naruto smiled behind his mask. You mean I can rescue them? You know I won't be able to keep it quiet, right? He said back to his sensei. I know, but I'll have some shadow clones run interference around the base, as well as doing some myself. Make them head for the clearing where we first camped. It should be relatively safe there. After that, wait for me. I will either meet you there or turn up shortly after with clothing for them. Good thing you dyed your hair right. Naruto ran his hand through his now black hair and smiled behind his mask. Understood, sensei, I'll see you there. Good luck. Yugao smiled. You too, Neri-chan, you too. Before cutting off the connection so Naruto could complain about her choice of nickname again. Naruto sighed at hearing Yugao's pet name for him forgetting the break of protocol before looking back at the women again. The gratitude was still there, but there was a tiny light of hope too. He sighed and cutting the women's arm and leg chains, the women took out their gags immediately. The brunette that was being raped when he first walked in spoke up first. Thank you. It wasn't much, but he could hear just how much gratitude lay in those 2 simple words. It's fine. He assured the woman. You can call me Oni, and I am going to get you out of here. Naruto said with conviction, the women's eyes widening at the declaration. Do you know how to get out of here? A timid-looking blonde said. Naruto nodded as he turned to look at her. I do. My team and I had the schematics for this place before we broke in, though we thought that it was just an info cache, not this. He gestured to the room around them. But more importantly, we better get going. Someone else might turn up soon. As for where we are heading, we're going to a clearing about 30 minutes away from the warehouse. One of my companions will meet us there with some clothes. He didn't like lying to them, but if the women knew that the only people there were a kid and one other person, ninja or not, they might panic. In the middle of enemy territory, he couldn't afford that. Naruto unsealed 3 explosive tag balls and threw them at the opposite wall where they stuck like some kind of sick parody of a beehive. Time to leave. He said to the women and rushed out the door. The 7 women he had saved in hot pursuit. Blood splattered over Naruto's mask. That was the 5th one he had cut down. There was no more time to use his jutsu to burn the bodies. He just needed to kill his opponents quickly and efficiently. He looked down at the thug beneath him. He had hit the lungs. The man would die. His blood would fill his lungs and come out of his mouth. Yes, man in front of him would drown on dry land. Naruto dispassionately positioned Benihim over the back of the thug's head and pushed down. Gray brain matter came out of his wrecked skull. It was a messy death, but far faster than dying of a lung wound. He looked back. The women were pale but okay and were taking weapons from the thugs he killed, whether to help fight if it came down to it or kill themselves instead of being taken again, he didn't know. Naruto turned his attention back to the hallway. 3 more thugs rounded the corner and their eyes widened in rage when they saw their comrades' bodies on the floor. Kill this motherfucker, one of them yelled as the 3 charged. Naruto observed them dispassionately. Their katanas raised high. They weren't very fast, wore no armor, and their stance was beyond sloppy. It was like they were asking for someone to kill them. He was happy to oblige them. They're full of openings. Benihim came up, severing the first's femoral artery, the second had his throat cut, and the third, Benihim was rammed through his heart without remorse. Naruto kicked the cooling corpse off the end of his blade and looked back. The one who had their artery cut had almost bled out. He waved the women over. He was no threat anymore. Before taking off again after throwing another explosive tag ball at a nearby wall. He wasn't sure what Yugao was doing as part of her distraction, but it was working. It had taken him an hour to reach the women's room while avoiding detection. So far they were almost out, and it had only taken 10 minutes, better yet he had only had to kill 12 people total. He did wonder what Yugao was doing as a distraction though. An explosion rocked the base, well that answered that question at least. He rounded the last corner and stopped dead. 15 people were guarding the exit and were looking straight at him, not good. He might have been able to take them if he had the element of surprise, but he didn't. Jutsu was out, he didn't know any that wouldn't harm the women too that left Kenjutsu and Kido, but he didn't like his odds. Naruto sighed he could release Benihim, but could he get out without doing so? Naruto weighed his odds, the men were still looking at him warily. Fuck it. He thought and pointed his left index finger at the first one. HADO number 4 by Akurai, the white lighting lanced into the first thug's head, exploding it into gray brain matter. Before hitting the man behind him through the heart, Naruto noted that the Hado did hit a third man, but lacked the ability to do more than lightly burn him. Still, that was better than he had hoped. Naruto charged Benihim held at his side, still sealed. Surprise right now was his greatest ally. When it got bad enough he would awaken her. Naruto stopped 10 meters short of the remaining 13 men and drew Benihim back over his head and took aim at where he could do the most damage. Raiden, he yelled, bringing the blade down. The attack was devastating. Unlike the Byakurai from earlier, the Raiden was more refined. Unsurprising, Benihim had told him he had a gift with Zanjutsu. The attack's results were gruesome. 3 men cut in half straight down the middle. Blood sprayed from the wounds, their intestines and other organs now decorating the ground. 4 others were missing limbs, arms or legs. It didn't matter, they couldn't fight anymore and were just waiting for death. 9 men dead or incapacitated in less than 2 minutes. The other 6 regained their bearings and charged. Naruto grimaced, he would only get off one more. His index finger extended to another thug. HADO number 4 by Akurai, the lance of white lightning lanced out, killing the man instantly by piercing his brain and burning a hole in the wall behind him, and then the others were upon him. The women watched in awe. It was an incredible display of skill. The thugs would swing and Naruto would just flow around the blow like he had never been there to begin with. Every slash or stab the thugs used was blocked or dodged, and it looked amazing, silver blades rising and falling, Naruto attacking then defending. He was living up to his namesake, he was dancing between the men and countering, like a maelstrom wielding a sword. Naruto slipped around another attack. This was what he had been waiting for. The man overbalanced, and Naruto made him pay for it. Benihim came up and sliced across his face, taking away the man's sight before descending again and cutting his throat. Naruto leaned forward as another blade cut the air above his head. His left hand reached down to his kunai pouch. The offending sword user paid for the attack with his right eye. Then with his life as the next kunai found a new home in his throat, Naruto jumped backwards, panting. The remaining 4 gave him more room, looking scared. The ones whose limbs had cut off had stopped crying out. They had either died of their wounds or fallen unconscious and were bleeding out. Naruto raised Benihim again, just 4 more. He really had surprised himself. He didn't think he'd get that many, now he just had to finish the job. A blur of grey amour and purple hair sped past him, and then Naruto got to see a true sword master at work. It was, in a word, beautiful. Absolutely no wasted movement. Yugao's blade moved left, right, up and down in short order before being returned to the sheath on her shoulder. The last 4 thugs fell, each clutching a fatal wound. It had happened in a single instant, so that was what a true master could do. Yugao turned to her wayward student and smiled beneath her mask. Ready to go. She addressed the woman behind him, who all nodded dumbly. You can trust her. Naruto interjected. She the team leader here, go on. He pointed to the staircase behind Yugao. The women gave him a relieved look and ran out. Yugao made to follow before hearing something that made her smirk behind her mask. Just passable, my ass. Naruto muttered, throwing his last explosive tag ball onto a nearby wall. Yugao just pointed to the exit before running out, a grumbling Naruto following. Outside the warehouse, Yugao went with a woman and told him to take care of the rest. Naruto waited until the group was well out of sight before jumping onto a nearby tree branch. After everything he had seen down there, he needed to see that place burn. Unlike the last time, Naruto smiled as he made the ram hand. Len yelled out a glee-filled Katsu before leaning back to watch the warehouse burn, and he did until it was nothing but ashes. He arrived in the clearing almost 30 minutes later, landing softly in front of Yugao. Job done, Nico, and from the looks of it, no survivors. All in all, a job well done, wouldn't you say? Naruto finished in a happy voice. He didn't like killing, but those men were scum. They deserved the death that they had been given, and then some. Yugao nodded to her student before sighing. Well then, Naru-chan, job done. I'll go back to Tezuna's first. You still need to wash off the blood. Naruto took off his mask and smiled at Yuago. Sure sensei, I might be back a little late, though I kinda feel like watching the stars. The purple-haired Anbu nodded her affirmative and smiled at him. You did another good job tonight. Naru-chan then took to the trees back to Tezuna's. Naruto ignored the use of his hated nickname. He had gotten used to that. Before washing off his hair dye and sealing his clothes and putting on his day-to-day attire. Then laying back on the grass to watch the night sky. He must have underestimated how sleepy he really was, because in seconds he was snoring under the open sky. Aku sighed as he walked up a small hill to the clearing. If Zabuza-sama had been more careful, then we could have finished this job already. he thought. Flashback 6 days ago, Zabuza vs teammate. Kurenai gasped for breath looking at the demon in front of her. Under his bandages, Zabuza's face was curled into a cruel smile. "I did warn you to run away, Jinjutsu mistress," he said in a condescending tone. Kurenai bit her lip. This was beyond bad. An A rank missing ninja. Her team were nowhere ready for this. Hell, she was nowhere near ready for this. She had already engaged him once, and that resulted in a nasty cut on her left arm. There was no way she could fight him right now. She might stress on the word might have had a chance to beat him if she was alone. But with her students she didn't stand a chance. Kurenai's hands blurred through seals. Jinjutsu. Triadanai Chikaku no Yami no Jutsu. She yelled. Finishing the Jinjutsu she had cast was a triple layer technique based off 3 lower ranked Jinjutsu. The 3 Jinjutsu deceived the senses of the user's opponent different ways. This Jinjutsu used them all at once, and unlike the previous 3, in order to dispel this Jinjutsu you needed to strip away 3 different layers, rather than just 1. The first layer made everything seemingly move slower, so that the opponent wouldn't take the attacks as seriously as they normally would. The second made it appear slightly darker, making the attack harder to see, and thus harder to judge its expected trajectory. The final layer is what made the combination deadly. It altered the opponent's sense of sight, making everything appear a half inch off, where it would normally be, making the opponent misjudge their stances and blocks, leading to their death. It was the final part of the Jinjutsu that Kurenai had used it, for she couldn't beat Zabuza head-on, but with a lot of luck this way had a chance. Kurenai pulled back her kunai and let it fly. The demon of the mist saw it coming and raised his Zanbato, the Kubikurumchim, to block, and realized that something was wrong. The area around him was a little darker. The pace of the woman's attack seemed a little slower. What was Jinjutsu? Zabuza hid the remainder of his head behind the Zanbato, but still got nicked on his neck for his trouble. "Nice try, Jinjutsu mistress, but you weren't quite good enough. Too bad. Now those kiddies are gonna die. Shame, huh?" Zabuza felt a burning sensation from his neck and let out a muffled scream. What the hell was going on? He saw the smile on Kurenai's face. "What the hell did you do to me, you bitch?" he yelled at the smirking crimson-eyed woman. "Just a little poison." The red-eyed beauty responded innocently. "Too bad, demon of the mist, looks like your number's up." Her smile turned feral as she drew out a second kunai and took aim. 2 senbon needles shot out from the trees and puncturing Zabuza's neck and seemingly killing him. Aku jumped out of his hiding place and moved to his master's side. He knew poisons this needed to be treated and fast. "Thanks for that. I don't think I could have killed him without your help." He grabbed Kubikurumchim. Time to leave, he thought, and quickly ran through some hand seals. "Thanks again." Haku disappeared in a shunshin. Kurenai's mind kicked back into gear, seeing the hunter ninja had momentarily stopped her train of thought. Well, at least Zabuza was taken care of. Her eyes went wide. Hunters were supposed to cut off their quarry's heads and burn the body immediately. That meant that. Fuck, she muttered under her breath. She needed backup and fast. Then flashback. He noticed a kid laying in the center of the field and approached slowly on the off chance it was an enemy ninja. Zabuza had hammered the fact that any and everyone he talked to could be an enemy in disguise. After almost being killed by the hunter ninja, whose mask he now wore, he took the lesson to heart. The hunter had disguised herself as a matron at an orphanage in Mizu no Kuni. She killed children with bloodlines by poisoning them. Haku and Zabuza had stayed the night. When the woman realized who they were, she tried to kill them. When she realized she couldn't do it head-on, she killed the children and used their corpses as a distraction. Haku had never been more disgusted with someone in his life. Considering his own father had tried to kill him, that was saying something. But it did make one of the most important lessons a shinobi can learn stick. Trust. No. 1. Haku looked down at the boy. He wasn't ordinary by any stretch of the word. Steel-toe combat boots, mottled gray pants and shirt, and a black trench coat. The katana his left hand was clutching wasn't helping his innocent look. But she couldn't see a headband on him, so maybe he worked for Gato. Haku hated that man. No matter how much power you had or how much money you amassed, some things were still wrong on a fundamental level, like slavery for example, something Gato was all too happy to trade in. Haku looked at the boy again, this time past the clothing. His face still had a lot of baby fat on it and 3 whisker marks. Bright sunny blonde hair. He looked like someone Haku should know, like someone who was vastly important in the past, and yet she couldn't place him. Haku shrugged and shook the boy's shoulder. He rolled away and muttered something about 5 more minutes. Haku got a twitch in one of his eyebrows. Zabuza-sama did that to him on days where the man was planning to be lazy. Oh no, that wasn't happening here. One lazy ass was more than enough, thank you very much. Haku kicked Naruto, this time electing a startled cry from the blonde. Naruto's eyes shot open and he looked straight at Haku. The person he was looking at was beautiful, not Benham's level of beautiful, but beautiful nonetheless. Tenshi, he said in a small voice, looking up at Haku. Haku had to smile slightly. He was sure he had been mistaken as a girl again, but it was hard to be angry at someone who had just woken up and couldn't think straight. "No, I'm not. You would have to be dead for us to meet if that were the case." Yuka chuckled to himself watching Naruto's eyes widening in realization of what he had just said. The abashed blonde rubbed the back of his head. Sorry about that, I was just a little out of it, just waking up and all. Naruto laughed again. Haku nodded and smiled, he did like this kid. Haku held out his hand and smiled at Naruto. My name's Haku and yours? Naruto took Haku's hand in his and smiled back. Uzumaki Naruto, pleased to meet you. He said back shrugging, before noticing the basket by Haku's side. Haku, what's the basket for if you don't mind me asking? Haku looked sad for a second. A person close to my heart was hurt, I was hoping to come here and gather some herbs to help them get better. Naruto nodded and looked Haku up and down for a second. Long dark hair, chocolate brown eyes and a pink kimono, strange half-moon designs on it, she didn't look threatening. Do you want some help? Think of it as payback for waking me up. He gave Haku a winning smile. Haku thought about it for a second. On one hand, if Naruto was a ninja he would be opening himself up to an attack. But by the same token, if he was a ninja and thought of him just as a civilian, he might be able to get some information out of him. He weighed his options. That would be of great help to me, Naruto-kun, thank you. Naruto blushed and scratched the back of his head, embarrassed. Haku held up a herb he had bought with him, so he knew what he was looking for. Ones like these would be fine, thank you, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded his head and lamented for a second. He didn't know the Kage Bunshin that would have made this so much easier. As they worked they talked about a lot of different things. He learned that the person that Haku wanted to help was someone he viewed as an adoptive father. In return, Haku learned that the sword she had seen Naruto clutching when she came into was his oldest and most valued possession. Naruto-kun. Haku asked, sounding somewhat nervous. Do you have any precious people? He asked. He liked the amount of time he had spent with Naruto. Now it was time to see if the child knew what Haku thought the path to true strength was. Naruto thought about the question for a second and looked back on his life, the old Hokage, Iruka, Tuchi, Am, Benham, Akane, and since she entered his life again his sensei Yugao. Naruto smiled at Haku, not a huge smile like he normally gave to others, but a small smile, the kind he gave the old Hokage when he thought about the people he loved. Yes. He stated firmly. Yes, I do. Though he was a little depressed about the fact he could literally count the number of people he called precious on less than 10 fingers, another legacy of the village's hate. Haku smiled back at him. That's good. He said, nodding to the blonde. When a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. At least it is what I believe to be true. Naruto nodded to the black-haired beauty he was beginning to see as his friend. Mostly because she never once looked at him with those eyes, yet another legacy of the village and the hate it pushed onto him, making him shoulder it because they didn't want to. Haku stood up and held out his hand, helping Naruto up and smiling brightly at him. Well then, Naruto-kun, guess I better get going, huh? Naruto nodded and smiled. So don't want to keep that precious person waiting now, do you, Haku-chan? Haku waved as he walked to the edge of the clearing before turning around. One last thing, Naruto-kun. Haku said before his face turned cold. I am. A boy. Naruto's jaw connected to the floor and Haku let out an evil laugh as he walked away. Benham summed Naruto's thoughts up in one, all the while laughing. Haha, that has got to be the most skilled trap I have ever seen. Naruto just nodded dumbly in agreement. Naruto walked through the front door of Tezuna's house. Man, considering that Gato is after him, shouldn't he at least lock the goddamn door? He thought, looking at said open door before shrugging and walking further in. Teammate and Yugao along with Tezuna, his daughter Tsunami, and a small boy in a bucket hat much like his hinges were all sitting and eating breakfast. They looked up and saw him enter, Kurenai's face narrowing in a small amount of anger. Yo. He said, waving. Who's the midget? He asked, pointing at the small boy. Yugao sighed. Naruto, the kid might be being trained to be a miniature Anbu, but he still had no tact. Tsunami was the first to speak up. This is my son Inari. She said, smiling down at the small boy who in turn had a depressed look on his face. Say hello, sweetie, this is another one of the ninja that will be guarding your grandpa while he builds the bridge. She said, smiling brightly. Naruto shook his head in awe while he looked at the kid that could pass for depressed. His mother was so bright and sunny, maybe it was because she felt the need to be bright enough for both of them. Naruto shook the thought off, he couldn't understand things like that, after all he had no personal experience to draw from. The boy looked up. Naruto noticed for the first time that he was wearing green overalls. But why, mom, they're all just going to die anyway. Just tell them to get out while they can or else they'll just die just like he did. Inari finished in a subdued tone. Naruto shook his head in amazement. I think we have a new contender for the Emo of the Year awards. He looked at Inari a little closer. But will he be able to take down Uchiha Sasaki, the current world champion 5 years running? Hiba just looked at Inari before bursting out laughing. Oh, we're gonna get killed, that's a good one, kid, tell another joke, why don't ya? He howled out in laughter. Inari's face clouded in anger. Shut up, you don't know what happened to this country and its people. I bet you never had anything bad happen to you in your life, you just got to go through it with no problems. you people. Inari yelled at the Leaf Genin and Jonin. You don't KONW what real suffering is. The room went quiet as the people inside it stared at Inari. Surprisingly, Naruto was quiet throughout the boys' rant. Yugao turned to her student. He seemed to have taken that rather well. At least he hadn't blown up at Inari yet, and considering what had happened to him in the past, he would have had every right to. Unsurprisingly, however, Naruto was the first one to open his mouth. Calm down, kid. He said, sounding far calmer than he was. This little bastard wanted to compare their suffering, saying he of all people didn't know suffering. There was more knowledge of suffering in Naruto's little finger than in Inari's entire body. But he fought that back down and tried to speak to the kid calmly. We. He pointed around the room. Our ninja, do you know what that means? It means we were trained to handle things like this from a young age. Don't worry so much, we will be fine, and more importantly we will help your grandpa over there finish the bridge. Naruto finished slowly. Even though he acts like a worthless drunk. He added in his head. Yugao looked at her student in concern. He was hiding it well, but she could tell from the way he was talking. Calmly and precisely, Naruto was beyond angry. Not that she blamed him, she had stopped people from beating him before. He lived alone, and people praised and rewarded their children for bullying him. He would have to be angry after Inari's outburst about them not knowing suffering. That was something that annoyed her too. How dare some kid that they didn't even know them tell them they didn't know suffering. Inari stared at Naruto in disbelief for a second. You don't know anything, you're just some stupid idiot that doesn't understand pain. I bet you have some kind of perfect family back home and that they always help you. Around here we have no one. You don't have any idea what life around here is like, so don't act like you do. Naruto fought down the urge to draw Benihim and kill the child in front of him. He had a perfect family, did he? He had no idea what pain was, did he? Inari, you still have your mother and your grandfather, don't you? Naruto started, his voice deathly cold, causing Inari to flinch backwards at his tone. And yet you claim to have nothing, you conceited little bastard. Naruto yelled. You claim we don't know pain. What the hell do you know about us, huh? You just wallow in your own misery alone and untroubled, not even sparing a glance at the people around you. A pathetic person like you has no right to judge me, and regardless of what may have happened to me in the past, I am glad I didn't turn out like you. Naruto finished, contempt filling his tone before he stood up and walked out of the house, slamming the front door behind him. The remaining 8 people in the house just looked at the front door as Naruto walked through it, not even one of them finding the strength to stand and stop him. Inari looked after the blonde ninja for a minute before running upstairs, his eyes warm with tears. Tsunami was livid with anger. How dare that little brat say that to her son? He was hurt and needed to heal, not to be chewed out by some little brat. Yugao sighed. I am sorry for Naruto's behavior. He has had a rough life, and I think seeing Inari act that way around him while he has you two really ticked him off. Tsunami's eyes narrowed. What kind of life did he have to make him do something like that? She still wasn't happy about what the preteen had said, but was willing to hear out Yugao's explanation. Yugao took another breath and turned her attention to Kurenai. Could you please take your team and look for him? If your guess is right, then Zabuza should attack tomorrow or the day after. The last thing we need when that happens is Naruto not knowing what is going on. Kurenai nodded and directed her team out the door. Yugao turned her attention back to Tazuna and Tsunami. To put things in perspective for you, Konoha is a village of about 15,000 people. Follow me so far. Yugao asked Tsunami, and Tazuna nodded their heads, wondering where the purple-haired woman was going with her explanation. Naruto could count the number of people in the village that have been nice to him on his hands, and before you ask, no, I am not joking. He was born on a dark day in our village's history when many of our ninja died, and most people couldn't handle it. They needed someone or something to blame. Yugao took a breath, her body shuddering. She had never agreed with what had happened to Naruto and still didn't. The villagers chose to blame Naruto for what had happened. He was an orphan and it was easier than facing the truth, I guess, but what happened to him was truly horrific. The matron of the orphanage he lived out would give him no food some days and beat him on others. When there was a fire, the woman locked his door and left him to burn alive. He escaped with third-degree burns by breaking his window and jumping out after the woman beat him for breaking the window. Yugao could see the disgust on Tsunami and Tazuna's faces, and this was just the tip of the iceberg. After that, he got an apartment at the age of 4, which to the best of my knowledge is still broken into regularly. His education was sabotaged and he was only sold rotten or out-of-date food at triple the price. Finally, he was beaten yearly on his birthday. She took a deep breath. It had been her first time meeting him when it had happened. She was 18 and it was her first day in Anbu. Naruto was 6. The first time I met Naruto was when he was 6 and it was October 10th, his birthday. Yugao looked the pair in the eyes and made sure they damn well knew what Naruto had been through that day. He was tied up and screaming for help. The other ninja around me did nothing, most of them blame him as well. The man doused in gasoline and kerosene before a mob started stabbing him and then set him on fire. Tsunami's face held a look of horror and Tazuna looked like he wanted to vomit. Do you want to know the worst part? Yugao said quietly this wasn't a memory she liked revisiting. When I put the fire out and scared the mob off I took him to the hospital and the woman behind the reception desk took one look at him and said. Take it away, we don't help things like it here, this is a place for people that deserve to be healed, to be helped, not monsters like him. I have never been more disgusted in a person than I was right then. That is why, Naruto went off at Inari. He didn't like the assumptions that Inari made, but I think it's more than that too. Naruto looks at Inari and sees what he might have turned out like and that scares him. Yugao finished sounding tired, she had taken great pains not to reveal anything classified. Hell, that was the reason why she had asked Kurenai's team to go look for Naruto. The last thing that she needed was Genin asking questions about Naruto's past. They would be awkward to say the least and might even get them killed depending on what they found. Yugao looked up at Tsunami and Tazuna's faces. Tsunai was crying and Tazuna looked like he wanted to vomit. That was the way people should react to people doing things like that to children. The one time Yugao had overheard a shinobi talk about beating Naruto, his friends had bought him a free drink for teaching the demon its place amongst its betters. Yugao had knocked all three of them out cold and given them to Ibiki for a free 3-week session and told the master torturer to have fun. Ibiki looked like Christmas had come early and when she had told him why, the man's smile had turned to a grimace and Yugao knew those men were going to suffer. She couldn't bring herself to feel sorry for them. In fact, she left the T&I, torture and interrogation, smiling and whistling a happy tune. Good deed for the day done. Yugao stood up from the table and turned towards the front door. I should go help them look, otherwise they probably won't find him. The kid had survived 2 months.